Okay, guys, so continuing with the general topic of signalling that the focus of VCAR Biology Unit 3 Outcome 2 is, we're looking at apoptosis today, okay? So when we're talking about apoptosis, that is programmed cell death. It's the naturally occurring death of cells. And just to give you an idea of how natural it is, I've just got a little table there that shows you the average life of different cells. Okay, so you can see stomach cells last about 2 days to 9 days, alveoli about 8 days, skin about 10 days to 30 days. You get the idea. You do get some cells that last for an extremely long time. Oocytes, which go on to form egg cells, they will last for a lifetime. Females are actually born with all the eggs they produce during their lifetime. And memory cells in your immune system that we'll look at later, they also last for life. But generally speaking, most of your cells don't last a huge amount of time. They're gone after not too long. So yeah, apoptosis is a very normal process. I've just put there, as well as cells reaching the end of their natural lifespan, apoptosis can be a response to damaged cells. It can be due to developmental purposes, and it can also be something that happens after an infection's gone away. I mentioned developmental purposes. When we're developing in the womb, there's actually webbing between our fingers. So there'd be skin going up there. Think a bit like a frog's feet. There'd be skin in between all of your fingers. It's just easier for the body to develop your fingers in those ways. And then after the fingers have developed properly, the cells that form the webbing undergo apoptosis, destroying themselves, leaving a stable hand as they do that. Okay? So like I say, apoptosis is a controlled process, and we've got to know exactly how it happens too. So, the first thing that happens is the cell receives a signal to initiate apoptosis, and that signal could be internal or it could be external. We'll look at that later. I've just got a diagram there showing you a receptor and then a signal with a complementary shape to it. Then the enzymes, enzymes are activated, called caspases, and they begin basically breaking down the nucleus. They break down any proteins in the cell. They break down the mitochondria. They basically just cut up all of those things. So I've just got as a diagram of that there. I've got it before where there's an intact nucleus and mitochondria, and then afterwards they're just sort of a bit of a blur showing that they've been broken down. So it's enzymes called caspases that do that. Next, the cell membrane condenses and it sort of loses its structure, and the folds that form in the membrane as it does that are referred to as blebs. And as this happens, bits of the cell may start to break off, and they're what we refer to as apoptic bodies. So just focusing on the diagram, the blebs are where the membrane is beginning to fold a little bit unusually, and then the apoptic bodies are the bits breaking off it there. Okay? And then finally, cytokines get released. And remember we said briefly in the last lesson, cytokines are messaging molecules in the body, often associated with the immune system, and they stop the area getting inflated, and they also attract phagocytes. Phagocytes are a type of immune cell that can engulf bacteria and viruses, but they can also engulf cells undergoing apoptosis. So we can see there, one's engulfing a bit of an apoptic body, just to sort of get it out of the way and clear the area, really. So I'll put that image onto Google Classroom, but just remember, in order, the cell gets a signal, caspases are activated and shred the nucleus, mitochondria, cell proteins, etc. The cell membrane condenses into blebs, so the cell membrane sort of starts to shrivel and lose its shape. The apoptic bodies break off it, and then cytokines get released, and phagocytes come and engulf the remaining parts of the cell. So just a bit of extra information. I mentioned earlier about the webbing in our fingers. So syndactyly is a condition where people's webbing doesn't disappear during development. So they basically may have webbed hands or webbed feet. That can be complete syndactyly, where the fingers are completely joined, or it may be partial, where one or two of them are joined. So that's a condition that can happen. Another condition that's linked to apoptosis is Alzheimer's can be linked to overactive apoptosis in brain cells. And I've just put there, and you can see I messed up what I wrote slightly, but failure to do apoptosis can result in uncontrolled cell growth, and that can lead to tumours forming. And also, cancerous products can cause mutations in apoptosis controlling genes. So if something's referred to as a carcinogen, so capable of causing cancer, it may be just causing mutations that make the cell grow out of control, and specifically it may cause a mutation that stops your body's ability to control apoptosis. So if the body can't control apoptosis, that means that the cell can't die when it's supposed to, and that means it can start growing in an uncontrolled way, and that's basically what a tumour is, a group of cells growing in an uncontrolled way. Okay? And also, just to compare apoptosis to necrosis, so we said earlier that apoptosis is programmed cell death. Necrosis is not controlled cell death. Okay? So necrosis is, it can be caused by toxins, certain types of bacteria can cause this, venoms from certain animals can cause this as well. And basically the cell undergoing necrosis just sort of swells, and then it bursts, and then that can lead to other cells getting infected or other cells being damaged as that happens. So necrosis is very, very uncontrolled cell death. Okay? And the final thing that we want to look at in relation to apoptosis is the two pathways of it, so the ways that apoptosis is initiated, the way that it begins. So the first one is called the mitochondrial pathway. So the signal that begins, in this case, in the mitochondrial pathway, often called the intrinsic pathway, the signal that begins apoptosis comes from inside the cell. And the stimulus for that is usually damage to DNA or mitochondrial enzymes, or it can be radiation damage. So basically, your cell's got controls in it that if it realizes its DNA has been damaged, most of the time it will be able to activate its own apoptosis and therefore stop the cell growing out of control. Unfortunately, that doesn't always happen, but that's the general idea. Our body should be able to recognize when it's been damaged, and the cells that have been damaged will be able to undergo apoptosis to protect the rest of the body. The other one, which has got a way more badass name, is the death receptor pathway, and that's an extrinsic pathway, meaning it comes from outside of the cell. Okay, and the stimulus for that tends to be more natural things, so developmental purposes like the webbing in our fingers in development, and the post-immune response. So what I mean by that one, the post-immune response, is after your body's fought off an infection, the cells that have done all the work to fight off the infection, which we'll look at when we study immunity, they're present in your body, but those are cells that work extremely hard. If they're not fighting off an infection anymore, that's just wasting the body's energy if they're there. So once they've killed what they're meant to be killing off, they undergo apoptosis, because if they're around in the body, they'd be causing harm when they're not fighting off infection. So the death receptor pathway tends to be a response to more natural things. The mitochondrial pathway tends to be a response to damage to the cell. So that is pretty much everything on apoptosis. I just thought I'd do something very slightly different today and finish with a quote. So there it is. It is normal to give away a little of one's life in order not to lose it all. And that was by Albert Camus, who was a philosopher. He won the Nobel Prize. In fact, he was the second youngest person ever to win a Nobel Prize. And I just thought that's quite a good quote, because apoptosis is bits of us dying, but when they die, they do that in order to allow us to be healthy. So I just thought that's quite a good quote to finish on. Okay, have a good day.